If you're visiting with us today, we've been studying through the entire Bible. We've been doing a daily Bible reading program. We started in January, and we've tried to keep up, haven't we, everybody? If you get behind, be sure and catch up on your reading. There are some outlines for the reading out in the lobby, and we've been continuing to print those, which means you're continuing to take them. Either you lost the ones you had, or you wanted another one, or you started to read. In any of those cases, I'm proud that we're doing this. It's a good thing. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, Uzzah was struck down before the Lord because he touched the ark. If you remember, the Philistines had the ark, and the ark was coming back. In this particular case, David was rejoicing before the Lord, and the ark was coming in on a cart. The oxen stumbled, and David saw that Uzzah reached forth his hand, and he steadied the ark with his hand, and he was struck down. Later, in 1 Chronicles 15, verse 13, David said, "Because you Levites did not carry it first, the Lord our God made an outburst on us, for we did not seek him according to the ordinance." It always happens when we get in trouble when we don't check out things according to the ordinances, don't we? 1 Chronicles 15, 1 through 3, "Now David built houses for himself in the city of David." If you remember in the lesson last week, I showed you how that David had conquered Jerusalem and made it the city of David as he snuck up through the water system there, and I showed you pictures of that. He also prepared a place for the ark ark of God, and pitched a tent for it. And David said, "No one is to carry the ark of God but the Levites, for the Lord chose them to carry the ark of God and to minister before him forever." If you'll look now in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we'll read the event of where the ark of God is actually brought into the city of Jerusalem with great joy and with great rejoicing. The first part of chapter 6 is about Uzzah's death for his irreverence in reaching forth and touching the ark with his hand. But in this later event, beginning in verse 12 of 2 Samuel, we read these words. "Now it was told King David, saying, Now the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him on account of the ark of God. And David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And so it was that when the bearers of the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and fatling. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of the trumpet. And it happened that as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And so they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent which David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offering and the peace offering, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Further, he distributed to all the people, to all the multitude of Israel, both to men and women, a cake of bread, and one of dates, and one of raisins to each one. And all the people departed each to his house. But when David returned to bless his house, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, How the king of Israel distinguished himself today. He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servant maids, one of the foolish ones, shameless and uncovered. So David said to Michal, It was before the Lord, who chose me above your father and above all of his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will celebrate before the Lord. And I will be more lightly esteemed than this. and will be more humble in my own eyes. But with the maids of whom you have spoken, with them I will be distinguished. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child until the day of her death. If you've been keeping up with our reading, you can't help but feel a little sorry for Michal. She was given to David as a reward for his slaying the giant Goliath. And so she becomes his wife. He had other wives as well. Later, when David is off and banished and being pursued by the jealous Saul, Michal is given to another man in marriage. Later then, when David comes back and his kingdom is established or is becoming established, David sends for Michal to come back and be his wife again. She's married someone else. And so there's this really tragic scene where they come and they take Michal away from her husband, and they're going away, and the husband is going on behind and he's weeping. And basically the guards pull out swords and say, you better go back if you know what's good for you. And Michal now is here and David is established. But I wanted you to see something that I think is really important and is really the focus of this morning's lesson. When Michal looks out the window and she criticizes David for his joyful worship, David says to her, "It was before the Lord that I was praising. It was before the Lord that I was worshiping. It was never intended, in a sense, to be for your eyes to peer out of the window and to judge what was going on as if it was for your eyes that I was doing this. It was before the Lord." And even more, David says, I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes, but by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. This was a very touching reading to me when I began to think about it as we read it this last week. It's very clear then to me that every observant Bible student sees David as a man of worship. When criticized for his joyful expression of worship, David responded, "It was for the Lord. It was before Him. My worship was for Him." David's worshipful spirit permeates almost everything about him, everything we read about him, but also everything that was written by him. And as we've looked at the Psalms this past week, we've seen time and time again that from David's mouth came words of worship. When we read about his life, in the narrative about his life, when we see David time and time again, he's driven to worship. So everything written by him and everything about him. Notice these words from 2 Samuel 7, verse 18. I love this. Then David the king went in, and he sat before the Lord, and he said, "Who am I, O Lord, and what is my house, that you have brought me this far?" Worshipful. There David sits before the Lord. Who am I and my house that you have chosen me? For this reason you are great, O Lord God, for there is none like you, and there is no God beside you, according to all that we have heard with our eyes, that your name may be magnified forever by saying, the Lord of hosts is God over Israel, and may the house of your servant David be established before you. How long has it been since you have had these kinds of words on your lips? That you've sat before the Lord, and in your heart you have rejoiced, that you have magnified God, that you have worshiped Him, that you have felt compelled in your heart to burst forth with praise and to adore God by saying, you are great, O Lord, there's no one like you, your name is to be magnified forever. When's the last time those words have burst forth from your heart? The natural response of man to the greatness of God's presence is awe. It's worshipful awe. In Genesis chapter 17, with regards to Abram, and when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Now notice these next words. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked to him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. Notice, Abram fell on his face, and he talked with God. This is the natural response for a person who truly grasps the greatness of God. It's something that we have to learn to do or allow our hearts to do. I guess it should come naturally, shouldn't it? Yesterday, with the youth group, we floated the Buffalo River. It was a beautiful day. The river was up a little bit. It was just perfect. Perfect day. And as we were going along, Susan and I on a raft, and I looked and saw all the cliffs, the dogwood trees, the beautiful things around. I said to her, think of the blessing of growing up here versus some big city where there's just concrete and asphalt. And as you look and you see the things, this has been a gorgeous spring, hasn't it? It was late to come, but you drive around town and you see all the beautiful things all around us. How could we just go to work and not on the way to work notice and see the beautiful things that God has made? And for our hearts to burst forth in worship. We are amazed by David as we see his heart always ready to worship. Abram fell on his face, the attitude of profoundest reverence assumed by Eastern people. It consisted in the prostrate body resting on the hands and knees with face bent until the forehead touches the ground. It's an expression of conscious humility and profound reverence. Humility and reverence. The Old Testament word that's given for worship, the principal Old Testament word, really even means to depress or to bow down or to prostrate oneself. The word is applied to acts of reverence. So the whole concept or the word that's given in the Old Testament concerning worship actually means to fall down and to worship. To understand and to see the greatness and the glory of God, and for that to take us to our knees in worship and in humility. So we stopped this morning, and we're thankful that David could teach us how to be a great man, a strong man, a warrior, but also to be a man who had confidence and trust in God and one who followed him wholeheartedly. And tonight we're going to study about David's great sin with Bathsheba, but I wanted you to see that throughout it all, even before and after David's sin with Bathsheba, he was a man who was worshipful. His heart burst forth in worship. I would like to suggest to you that David was able to understand the importance of worship because he realized, first of all, that God is worthy. He is worthy. Now we're going to sample some Psalms of David to show you and to show me and to emphasize how that David understood the worthiness of God. To the chief musician, a Psalm of David, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Every person of every language in any part of the world can look at the things that God has created and can hear the speech that they proclaim. Can see the firmament, can understand the created things, and to see those and realize there is a Creator, great and magnificent who created those things. And to understand that of every speech and every language, that greatness is proclaimed. In Romans chapter 1, Paul writes that those who do not believe in God are without excuse because the things that are created prove that God is real and that He exists. And that only those who would close their eyes to the worthiness and magnitude and greatness of God, only those who would close their eyes would be unable to see His goodness and His greatness. Now let's read together Psalm 145. That's next. Psalm 145. I could have chosen many, but this is a good one. I've chosen all of the ones that were written by David. Psalm 145. I will extol thee, my God, O King. I will bless thy name forever and ever. Every day I will bless thee, and I will praise thy name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and highly to be praised, and His greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of thy majesty, and on thy wonderful works I will meditate. And men shall speak of the power of thine awesome acts, and I will tell of thy greatness. They shall eagerly utter the memory of thy abundant goodness, and will shout joyfully of thy righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and great in loving kindness. The Lord is good to all. His mercies are over all thy works. All thy works shall give thanks to thee, O Lord, and thy godly ones shall bless thee. They shall speak of the glory of thy kingdom, and talk of thy power, to make known to the sons of men thy mighty acts and the glory of the majesty of thy kingdom. Thy kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and thy dominion endures throughout all generation. The Lord sustains all who fall, and raises up those who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to thee, and thou dost give them their food in due time. Thou dost open thy hand, and dost satisfy the desire of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all His ways, and kind in all His deeds. The Lord is near to all who call upon Him, all who call in truth. He will fulfill the desire of those who fear Him, and will hear their cry and save them. The Lord keeps all who love Him, but all the wicked He will destroy. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and all flesh will bless His holy name forever and ever. Great words, aren't they? Worshipful words, an overflow of David's heart unto the Lord. I will extol you, O my King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you. I will praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and highly to be praised, and His greatness is unsearchable. Does that describe us? Do we worship like this? Are these the words our hearts say? Or do we simply just barrel through our lives to every appointment that we have and miss out on the opportunities to worship? Yes, we worship together as we're here like this morning. But will we worship tomorrow when we see the goodness of God displayed in our world? Will we worship then? Will we pause then to say in our hearts, God, you are great. I extol you. I'll bless your name forever and ever. If we were to outline Psalm 145, this is kind of my outline. We find the first three verses, praise in exaltation. Verses 4 through 6, praise in proclamation, where he says a person who understands and knows the goodness of God is going to tell the next generation, look how great God is. And then praise is celebration for His goodness, for His righteousness, for His compassion, for His patience, and for His love. Another man has outlined Psalm 145 this way. Verses 1 through 3, the Lord is great. Verses 4 through 9, the Lord is great because of His mighty acts and His attributes. Verses 10 through 13, the Lord is great because His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. And verses 14 through 21, the Lord is great because of His care of all of His creatures, and especially of His covenant people. Wow, that's good stuff. I want to remember that outline. Psalm 103, verses 1 and 2, a psalm of David. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of His benefits. Tom Dockery has written, man will always worship something. For it is the nature of man to worship. No society has ever been found that is so primitive as to not worship something in some way, and man will worship himself, if nothing else. We will worship something. Will we worship ourselves? Or will we worship the one who is worthy of worship? Number two, I think it's important for us to understand that when it comes to worship, that worship is not primarily for us. And listen carefully, this is really important for us. Do we benefit from worship? Of course. Are we encouraged by worship? Yes. Do the words of songs teach us? Of course. Do the scriptures chastise us and instruct us? Of course. But primarily, worship is not for us. Primarily, we must realize that when we come in for worship, that God is the audience. Now, we use the term, we're the audience. You're the audience. I'm the speaker and you're the audience. That's really not true when it comes to worship as an assembly of God's people. He is the audience. And one of the great misconceptions of worship is that we are the audience. We are not the audience. He alone is the audience. We are here to worship Him, to glorify Him, to magnify Him. We benefit from that, but He is the audience. Now, consider this. When we are the audience, we come for what we can get. When He is the audience, we come for what we can give. So when we leave and go out these doors and get in our cars and go home today, a better question than what did I get out of it today is, what did I give to the Lord today? It's a better question, isn't it? When we are the audience, we come to have our needs met. When He is the audience, we come to glorify Him, which meets our needs. It's different. It's the different way to think. When we are the audience, we come as critiquers. When He is the audience, we come with praise. It's tempting, and I do it too, to come to worship as a critiquer. Were the songs good? Was the sermon good? Was it hot? Was it cold? Was it interesting? Was it boring? And we come and we've left and we've critiqued everything. But when we do, we've been misinformed that the worship was about us. When the worship is about God, then the critiquing is a little different. It's not critiquing by how much we got out of it, but whether God was truly glorified by our worship. And what did we give? When we are the audience, we come as critiquers. When He is the audience, we come to praise. He is the audience. Number 3, I am humble and reverent. There's my part. I'm in awe of Him. And I would like to add one to this, which I didn't put on here. And joyful. Because when we see David, and he's there, and he's dancing before the Lord, and he's praising the Lord, and he's in worship before the Lord, his heart is filled with joy. But also, we know as we look at David and we read his writings and we see the descriptions of him, he was humble and he was reverent. Humility is the most prominent feature of heaven from our perspective as worshipers. Every believer we see in heaven is constantly doing one thing over and over, falling on their faces before an awesome God who alone is the one to be worship-worthy, adoration receiving, and humility receiving. Let's go to the next slide. The 24 elders will fall down before him who sits on the throne and will worship him who lives forever and ever, and will cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Worthy art thou, O our Lord, our God, to receive glory and honor and power." What's the response of the 24 elders when they come in and recognize the glory of the Lord? They fall down in reverence, in humility, in worship. Revelation 5 and verse 14, "And the 4 living creatures kept saying, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshiped." Again, the same idea, falling down when understanding the greatness of God. It's a kind of spirit that we see Jesus pointing out to the disciples and saying, "I want you to see, look, the tax gatherer, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, 'God, be merciful to me, the sinner.'" Psalm 51, verse 17. The words of David, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise." Even in Isaiah 33, verses 5 and 6, "The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high. He will fill Zion with justice and righteousness. He will be the sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure." David's worshipful spirit then permeates almost everything written by him and about him. The natural response of man to the greatness of God's presence is worshipful awe. When Michal looked out the window and she despised David in her heart because of his display before the Lord, he tells her, "It wasn't for you, it was for the Lord. I had to celebrate, I had to worship, because my heart was filled with that kind of worship and gratitude." So I wonder, brothers and sisters, what kind of worshipers will we be? Do we see the worthiness of God in the world around us and in the things He's done? Do we understand the magnitude of His power and His greatness? And do we take the time, or have we cultivated those kinds of hearts that will worship? When we do, we may very well just find ourselves falling down on our knees a lot more often, because that is the kind of response that comes to those who understand God's greatness. Let's worship Him. He is worthy. If you'd like to respond to this message this morning, come now as we stand and sing.